The first shovel struck wood. That's what the foreman told investigators in 1932 when they began clearing the collapsed grounds of Belleville Plantation, an estate so old it had vanished from the county maps. Beneath a century of silt and swamp rot, the men unearthed what they thought was a cellar. But when the boards gave way, the stench that poured out wasn't of decay. It was sweet, thick, clinging like burnt sugar. They found the barn sealed from the inside, every beam blackened but unbroken. No bones, no tools, no evidence of life, just the marks, thousands of them, etched into every wall. Names carved over names, layer upon layer until the wood itself seemed to pulse under lamplight. Some of the carvings were dates, others prayers. A few were in languages the researchers couldn't identify. But the sound was what they remembered most. Even after the lanterns were snuffed and the swamp winds quieted, the men swore they heard a lullaby drifting from inside that ruin. A woman's voice, soft, uneven, impossibly far away, singing through the cracks. The next morning, one of the men refused to go back. He kept saying the words had changed overnight, that the carvings had grown. For weeks, the site was catalogued and forgotten again. The parish called it superstition. The university called it structural illusion. The foreman drank himself into silence before the year ended. But one fragment of the barn wall survived, preserved in an evidence crate now locked away in a private collection. Under the right light, the grain of the wood still reveals faint letters scorched into its surface. Celeste Devane, the Hollow Child. The archives of St. Martin Parish hold no mention of Belleville after 1847. It's as if the plantation never existed. But in 1929, an archivist named Thomas Greer found a single ledger page wedged between hymnal indexes. Its ink warped with humidity, its handwriting foreign. At the top, Devane, Aurelia Household, 1847. The list beneath it seemed ordinary. Supplies, grain, livestock until the last entry. 3 souls set aside for the cleansing. Greer sent the note to the diocesan historian, who dismissed it as rural mysticism. 2 months later, Greer was dismissed from the archives. He left behind a short letter claiming that the ledger smelled faintly of molasses and ashes. The record was never seen again. When the documentary team revisited the parish in 1952, the archivist then on duty refused to be filmed. He said only, "We were told not to open that box again." A black and white photograph remains. The label Belleville, scratched out with a single nail mark. Violent, deliberate. The narrator's voice lowers. In a nation that built its fortune on sugar, silence was the truest currency. What happened at Belleville wasn't erased by time. It was erased by command. Lady Aurelia Devane was born into privilege and isolation. By 1847, she was both the widow and ruler of Belleville, one of the largest sugar estates in Louisiana. Her husband's sudden death left her with land, debt, and whispers of unnatural fortune. Travelers described her as composed yet haunted by the sun. She never appeared in daylight without a parasol, claiming the light disturbed her daughter's rest. Neighbors spoke of the bells at Belleville tolling at midnight, of her carriage seen drifting toward the cane fields long after workers were gone. And though the plantation's fields thrived, those who worked them said the soil bled a black sap when cut too deep. Letters from visiting clergy paint Aurelia as devout, yet each ends with unease. One priest wrote, "Her prayers are recitations of hunger. She does not speak to God, she bargains." After her husband's funeral, she reportedly forbade mirrors in the house and replaced every portrait with a single oil painting. A pale child in white, her face blurred by brushstrokes. Locals called Aurelia the mistress of mourning. To those who lived under her rule, she was simply Madame Hollow. Celeste Devane was 9 years old when the records end. No photographs survive, but a surviving diary from a field hand named Ruth describes her as a child with eyes that watched too much. Ruth wrote that Celeste never spoke before sunset, but after dark, she would hum strange tunes from her window, melodies no one recognized. The workers began calling them the Hollow Hymns. Visitors described Celeste as unnaturally quiet, yet animals avoided her. Horses refused to pass near her window. Birds fell silent when she entered the garden. One account from a local physician noted that her heartbeat was slow and irregular, as if her chest echoed instead of breathed. In August of 1847, Lady Aurelia began building a new barn at the edge of the plantation, a structure of cypress and pine, reinforced with iron locks. When asked why, she answered, "It is for Celeste's cleansing." Within weeks, the overseer and 3 servants, Jonas, Ruth, and Solomon, were ordered to prepare the barn nightly. What for, no one knew. A letter found decades later in a New Orleans rectory describes Aurelia's growing madness. The mother believes her daughter hollow, filled with voices not her own, the priest wrote. She prepares a ritual to return what was stolen from the bloodline. The first omen came from the river. One dawn, fishermen along Bayou Noir found the water thick with dead fish, their eyes clouded white. The current shimmered black beneath the rising sun, as if the river itself had turned to oil. That same week, the plantation's well soured. Workers swore the water hissed when poured, and a smell like rusted pennies filled the air. Old tales from the region warned of the sugar curse, a belief that the land remembers cruelty. When the earth grows full of unburied pain, it poisons its own water. But Aurelia dismissed all superstition. She claimed it was divine correction. "The river takes what we've hidden," she said to her housekeeper, "and returns what we owe." Storms rolled for 9 nights without pause. Lightning struck the bell tower, yet it did not fall. On the final night, witnesses said the plantation glowed faintly blue, like moonlight shining through glass even though the moon itself was gone. By morning, the barn's locks were sealed. Their names surface only in a single plantation ledger: Jonas, Ruth, Solomon. 3 workers chosen by Lady Aurelia for what she called the night of cleansing. No explanation followed, only the word necessary. Descendants interviewed in the 1940s recalled that their ancestors had spoken of strange preparations: barrels of river clay carried into the new barn, candles molded from tallow and cane syrup, and a basin carved from white limestone that had not come from any quarry in Louisiana. On the eve of the storm, Aurelia dismissed every overseer. The 3 were ordered to stay. A witness hiding in the cane rows swore he saw the mistress leading them by lantern light, her daughter trailing behind, barefoot, humming. After that night, none were seen again. Yet for weeks, the field hands reported hearing movement inside the locked barn. Scratching, a rhythm like slow breathing, sometimes the thud of something heavy dragged across the floor. The constable recorded one visit but closed his notes with a single line: "No living person answers from within. No further inquiry advised." When historians reconstructed the timeline, they found that the final storm of 1847 struck precisely as the parish clock reached midnight. Lightning set fire to the north fields but left the barn untouched. Later accounts describe Aurelia standing in the rain, soaked and smiling, whispering to the thunder. Inside, something moved. Some said it was chanting. Others said it was only the wind trapped between the boards. The next morning, the locks were fused, melted as if by heat. The windows blackened from the inside. Not a single print marked the mud around the structure. Only Aurelia remained, kneeling in the cane rows, her hands bleeding from prayer. When neighbors tried to speak to her, she repeated a single word: "Hollow." The local newspaper of 1848 printed one short column: "Strange illness closes Belleville estate." No mention of the deaths, no mention of the barn. But private letters reveal something else: a sickness spreading through St. Martin. Children woke screaming at night, claiming to hear humming through their walls. Wells turned bitter. Livestock miscarried. Doctors blamed the swamp air. Priests performed mass at every home. But even they began to whisper that the Devane woman had touched something older than scripture. By autumn, the plantation was deserted. A traveler wrote of entering the main house and finding every mirror turned to face the wall. Every clock stopped at 12. On the parlor piano, a single note had been struck and never released. Its string rusted to silence. No one would buy the land. The sugar fields went feral, swallowing the fences until nothing remained but cane, river, and the whisper of a song that would not die. Church records from 1849 mention an unnamed incident requiring containment. The phrase appears beside expenditures for lime, timber, and transport of relics. Handwriting analysis later confirmed the entries belonged to Father Marcelin Beaumont, the priest who served Bellevilles Chapel. A letter to his superior survives in fragments. She sought communion with the hollow voice. I have done as commanded. The doors are sealed. May heaven forgive what we buried. The diocese's next ledger begins with a different date system, as if time itself restarted after the incident. Local rumor insists a wooden crate was shipped to New Orleans labeled sacramentals. When opened decades later, museum curators found inside only fragments of carved pine smelling faintly of syrup and smoke. The church called it superstition. Yet the archivist who handled those fragments kept hearing a faint hum whenever the box was near. He requested reassignment within the week. In 1904, a family renovating a townhouse in Baton Rouge discovered a tin case behind an old fireplace. Inside lay a water-stained book bound in white cloth, The Private Reflections of Aurelia Devane. Its pages alternated between scripture and delirium. She wrote of a voice that entered through the child's breath, and of an ancient hymn promising purification through sweetness and fire. She called it the Liturgy of the Hollow. One entry reads, The blood of the field remembers. The river has answered. My daughter is the mouth through which the buried speak. Psychologists later speculated that Aurelia suffered from isolation and grief hallucinations. Yet the handwriting on the final page changes completely. Smaller, tighter, as if written by another hand. Mother says I am empty no longer. The song is inside me now. When folklorists recorded the Delta Field songs in the 1920s, they found one melody that had no known root. It surfaced in work camps, in children's games, even in sermons whispered during storms. Always the same tune, always the same refrain. For notes rising, 3 falling, and a closing hum that no one could transcribe. Phonographs from those sessions still exist. On one cylinder, the singer pauses halfway through and asks the collector, You sure you want that one? My gran said it brings things near. Comparison of the tune with Aurelia Devane's writings revealed a near-perfect match. The words are lost, but fragments translate to sweet mouth of the earth. Open for me. Historians argue over origin, African, Creole, or purely imagined, but those who've heard it say it feels older than language. When replayed in a lab decades later, the hum at the end registered below human hearing, vibrating the recorder's glass housing until it cracked. Modern scholars call Bellevilles a study in collective trauma. Generations carrying the weight of unspoken violence, turning memory into superstition. Yet psychologists who reviewed the accounts noticed something stranger. Recurring sensory details shared by people a century apart. Molasses, static, and a rhythm like breathing under the floor. Dr. Eleanor Fitch, who interviewed descendants in 1943, wrote, Their dreams align like choreography. Different families, same sequence. Storm, barn, song, silence. She proposed that trauma could encode itself in sound. The church rejected her report. The university filed it under folklore. 2 months later, Fitch abandoned her practice, leaving only a note. The melody doesn't stop when the machine is off. In 1932, excavators uncovered what remained of the barn. The interior planks were covered in markings so dense they appeared woven. Under magnification, archaeologists found each line carved by different hands, as if generations had written over one another. Among the inscriptions were inverted psalms, star diagrams, and a pattern repeating every 7 inches, the shape of a mouth. Chemical testing proved the carvings burned themselves into the grain from inside out, not by flame but by heat without source. When the fragments were placed in a museum case, visitors reported a faint humming from the wood. Curators sealed it in glass, yet the sound persisted, lower than any note a human throat could make. One night the case cracked clean across. Security blamed humidity. The night guard resigned, claiming he heard a child singing in the dark. Across Louisiana and Mississippi, families still speak of the hollow child. They whisper it as warning. Don't answer if you hear her hum. In 1947, An anthropologist collected testimonies from 30 people claiming their ancestors once worked at Belleville. Every account ended the same way. A refusal to say the name aloud a second time. Across Louisiana and Mississippi, families still speak of the hollow child. They whisper it as warning. Don't answer if you hear her hum. In 1947, an anthropologist collected testimonies from 30 people claiming their ancestors once worked at Belleville. Every account ended the same way. A refusal to say the name aloud a second time. One elderly woman described the curse differently. It ain't the child that haunts, she said. It's the listening. You start to hear what the land remembers. Official diocesan correspondence from the late 19th century makes no mention of Belleville, yet budget ledgers list payments labeled maintenance of the sealed ground. Maps show a blank rectangle along Bayou Noir where every other parcel is numbered. A 1908 memorandum to the Archbishop warns, do not sanctify the soil. Containment depends upon neglect. When filmmakers requested access in 1950, church representatives refused, citing pastoral sensitivity. Still, one unnamed priest met them privately. He confirmed that an order had been issued to erase the Devane name from baptismal rolls, marriage records, even gravestones. He ended the meeting with a single line that never made it into the broadcast. We do not fear evil, gentlemen. We fear recognition. Some prayers are locks, not doors. In the summer of 1948, a small university team revisited Belleville's ruins. Their notes described the site as eerily intact, the soil still refusing new growth. They pitched camp near the collapsed bell tower and began sound recordings at dusk. The first night was uneventful. The second filled every cylinder with static layered by a faint, rhythmic hum. On the third, the lead researcher, Samuel Dane, reported lights under the ground, pale, bluish, pulsing with the hum's tempo. By morning, the camp was abandoned. The sheriff found all equipment arranged in a circle around the barn's foundation, recorders still spinning. One tape captured Dane's voice whispering, "She's listening back." The university sealed the materials. 2 reels were misplaced during cataloging. They have never been recovered. Decades later, occult historians proposed that Belleville was not destroyed but quarantined. The barn's geometry, 7 corners where 4 should stand, suggested deliberate design. Its orientation matched no compass, but followed the curve of the bayou like a spiral inward. Dr. Harold Marin wrote, "The plantation was engineered to bury a vibration. Every field, every canal, a boundary to hold the hymn." He argued that Aurelia's ritual had inverted the Christian idea of redemption. Instead of offering suffering to heaven, she offered it to the land, binding grief to sugar and soil. The sweetness masked the rot. Critics dismissed him, yet those who read his notes claimed the pages themselves carried a faint scent of burned syrup, as though the paper remembered the fire. In 1956, a private collector purchased one of the missing reels. The recording, played publicly only once, begins with wind, then 4 clear notes. Listeners described a sensation of pressure in the chest, as if the sound itself inhaled. Audio engineers discovered overlapping frequencies, one human, one beyond range. When isolated, the subtone formed a pattern resembling a voice repeating the word "here." Moments later, the reel abruptly reverses itself, playing the same tune backward before the tape burns through from friction. The collector kept the remnants in a lead box until his death. The contents were lost in transit to an archive that later denied ever receiving them. In 1963, a sealed envelope surfaced among Father Beaumont's estate papers. Inside lay a letter never sent, addressed to the Archbishop. Celeste was not her child. The woman bore nothing of flesh that year. She claimed the river gave her the girl, whole and silent. I baptized the thing because I feared what would happen if I refused. No signature follows, only the faint outline of a cross pressed too hard into the parchment. Historians debate its authenticity, but handwriting analysis matches Beaumont's earlier confessions. If true, Belleville was founded not on inheritance, but on adoption of something the earth itself delivered. And when Aurelia tried to purify it, the ritual did not banish the presence. It spread it through every voice that remembered the song. The camera lingers on the bayou at dusk. Cicadas drone. The water mirrors the sky in bruised violet light. The narrator speaks softly. History favors what can be measured. Yet some truths remain unarchived. Sung instead of written. Buried instead of disproved. Bellevue's story is not about ghosts. It is about remembrance that refused to stay silent. The land was never cursed. It was listening. The final frame fades to black. Only the hum remains, low, steady, almost kind, until it resolves into the 4 rising notes of the hollow hymn, then silence.